Sassicaia is turning 50 years old, and this anniversary should be highlighted and celebrated at least with a video. That is what we want to dedicate to it. Sassicaia is an iconic wine, a legendary wine in Italy, but it has a history that perhaps not everyone knows. It is a story that begins in 1930 when Clarice della Gherardesca and Mario Incisa della Rocchetta got married. Clarice della Gherardesca was a noble lady from the della Gherardesca family, which is a Tuscan family from Pisa in particular, and she brought as a dowry to the Incisa della Rocchetta family, who instead came from Piedmont, from Rocchetta Tanaro. She brought the great fiefdom of Sassicaia, which was right in Bolgheri. It was a wilderness area, Sassicaia, and it was an area that was still partly marshy, and there are still marshes around there. However, the wine was still on its way, and let me now reveal the events that unfolded. A few years later, Clarice and Mario moved to Sassicaia and lived there their whole life practically. After arriving from Piedmont, Mario Incisa was amazed by the breathtaking beauty of Bolgheri, despite the existence of some challenges such as marshes and wetlands. Thriving in this untamed setting, Incisa shared a naturalistic worldview with noble figures like Boncompagni Ludovici and Alberico Boncompagni Ludovici in Fiorano. These individuals deeply respected nature and embraced its intrinsic qualities. Bolgheri, with its captivating natural beauty, perfectly embodied this philosophy. Years earlier, Incisa had come into contact with his relatives, the Salviati Dukes of Migliarino. Already harboring a passion for wines, especially of French origin, Incisa was well aware of the dominance of French wines during the 1930s. Renowned varieties such as Barolo and Bordeaux reigned supreme. While Incisa had connections with the Rothschilds, his encounter with the Salviati Dukes proved to be influential. In Migliarino, they cultivated a special grape variety of French origin, Cabernet, encompassing both Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon. Recognizing Bolgheri's potential for winemaking, Incisa concluded that Cabernet, both Sauvignon and Franc, was the ideal grape variety for the region. With this in mind, he obtained cuttings from the Salviati Dukes and established a vineyard in the elevated Castiglioncello region, which offered a splendid view of Bolgheri. Located at a higher elevation, the area benefited from cooler temperatures. Additionally, the prevalent Ponente wind from the sea, known as the Ponentino in Rome, blew every evening, creating a desirable environment for the vines. In 1948, equipped with the Cabernet cuttings, Incisa began the winemaking process and named the resulting wine Sassicaia. Thus, Mario Incisa's discovery of Bolgheri's natural allure, combined with his familial ties and admiration for French wines, led him to establish a vineyard and create the renowned Sassicaia vintage. This remarkable journey shaped the course of Bolgheri's winemaking history. A few years later, owing to his cousin being Niccolo Antinori, and Niccolo Antinori, the aforementioned cousin, carrying a profound expertise in the interpretation of Chianti Classico wines, he advised Mario Incisa, from whom this tale begins, to venture into producing more wine for commercial purposes rather than solely for personal consumption. Mario Incisa was swayed by Niccolo's suggestion and agreed to enlist the assistance of Giacomo Tacis, a skilled winemaker employed by their winery. Subsequently, Giacomo was sent to Bolgheri to determine the prospects available there and commence winemaking operations. Having witnessed this story, Giacomo Tacis conveyed to me the existence of a winery that operated in a rather traditional manner. The winery lacked the required expertise to produce wines in a professional manner. However, they devoted their efforts chiefly to perfecting the Del Marchese Incisa variety. Thus, when it came to creating the inaugural batch of Sassicaia in 1968, an extensive selection process was inevitable. Numerous vintage years had to be thoroughly tested and evaluated to identify the wines suitable for bottling. Unfortunately, many wines had turned bad and were unsuitable for immediate consumption or long-term storage. Consequently, a meticulous selection was carried out, resulting in the production of a limited 6,000 bottles. This impressive feat was accomplished by blending together a small amount of wine from various vintages, namely 1965, 1966, 1967, just over 1968, and even a fraction from 1969. Although commonly referred to as the 1968 vintage due to its majority contribution, it actually encompassed wine from 5 distinct vintages. Furthermore, the winery also housed some large barrels, a few other things. However, then, the production process of the 68 Sassicaia vintage was carried out in a similar manner. And so it was in the year of 68 when the revered Sassicaia emerged from its secretive domain, courtesy of Niccolò Antinori's adept distribution. However, Antinori did not directly bestow this treasure upon the world with his eponymous label, for he possessed a distinct property in Orvieto known as Biggie of Orvieto. It was this very entity that first disseminated Sassicaia to the illustrious city of Milan in the astonishing quantity of 168. In time, Biggie found new ownership in the hands of Wine Food and Gruppo Italiano Vini, blossoming into a transformed company today. As for Antinori, he found solace in Castello della Sala, yet in those early days, Biggie, not Antinori, held the honor of distributing Sassicaia. It was during this period that Sassicaia earned its reputation as a benchmark wine, a cult phenomenon that slowly simmered to prominence, particularly with the advent of more modern winemaking methods inspired by the infamous Neo-Bordolese approach. In 1972, the introduction of French barriques signaled a new chapter for Sassicaia. The initial vintages of 68, 70, and 71 had been crafted with a more audacious flair, employing larger barrels. There existed the possibility that not only Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon played a role in these wines, but also Canaiolo, particularly in the vintage of 68. Yet Sassicaia encompasses more than an exceptional wine. Its creator, Mario Incisa, was no mere winemaker, but a true visionary. He established what has come to be known as the Bolgheri Oasis, a sanctuary dedicated to the conservation of biodiversity. During the winter season, the Bolgheri Oasis attracts a multitude of rare and migratory birds, while cultivating fields of wheat and olives that foster an astonishing range of biodiversity. Additionally, it proudly houses a racehorse farm, which served as the birthplace of Dormello Olgiata, a venture tightly connected to the Incisa and Rocchetta families. Although Dormello is situated near Lake Como and Olgiata near Rome, the roots of their illustrious horse breeding endeavors can be traced back to Bolgheri. At the onset, Mario Incisa enlisted the expertise of Federico Tesio, an esteemed figure in Italian horse racing history. Bolgheri soon became renowned for breeding some of Italy's most formidable racehorses, flourishing into a hub of equestrian excellence. It was indeed within these fertile lands that Raibot, the legendary steed, was nurtured to greatness, weaving together the worlds of Sassicaia and horse breeding. Thus, as we commemorate 50 years of Sassicaia, we must acknowledge the interwoven tapestry of its story, and its impact reaches far beyond that of a simple bottle of wine. And so, we find ourselves compelled to reflect on the significance behind this momentous milestone. 50 years have passed since the release of the 2018 edition of Sassicaia, marking its 50th anniversary. It is worth noting that Sassicaia holds a unique position among the noteworthy Bolgheri wines of 2018. This is because Sassicaia is one of the few wines that played a crucial role in the establishment of the Bolgheri region as a significant wine-producing area. Before the emergence of Sassicaia, Bolgheri had a rather unremarkable presence in the wine industry. However, the birth of Sassicaia in 1968 led to a radical transformation in Bolgheri's winemaking scene. Admittedly, it did take a few years for other captivating Bolgheri wines to emerge, with the late 1970s and early 1980s being the turning point, about 10 years after Sassicaia's debut. Nonetheless, Sassicaia served as the pioneer, demonstrating that exceptional red wines could indeed be crafted in Bolgheri using predominantly Cabernet Sauvignon, along with a dash of Cabernet Franc. Undeniably, this marked a momentous breakthrough. To delve further into the region's viticultural history, the Bolgheri DOCSI, Denominazione di Origine Controllata, was established in 1994. It is noteworthy that this date is relatively recent, considering that the concept of DOCS was introduced in Italy in 1963, and the first appellations were granted in 1966 and 1967. Hence, it took almost 30 years to grant a controlled designation of origin to the Bulgari area. Furthermore, in 2013, a specific designation was even established exclusively for Sassicaia. It is now known as Bulgari Sassicaia Doki, differentiating itself from both Bulgari and Bulgari Superiore. The incorporation of the wine's name into the designation is a rare occurrence, not just within Italy but also globally, stressing the remarkable influence Sassicaia has had on the region. In conclusion, the release of the 2018 edition of Sassicaia commemorated 50 years of excellence. Its role in driving the success and recognition of Bulgaria as a wine-growing region cannot be overstated. Despite its recent birth, the region has secured its place in the viticultural landscape, with Sassicaia playing a definitive part in its journey. From the early 1980s, Mario Incisa della Rocchetta's son, Niccolò Incisa della Rocchetta, entered the scene. Niccolò has always been a great horse lover, fell a little bit in love with wine, and started to deal with it precisely from the beginning of the 1980s. In 1985, he was the creator, together with Giacomo Takis, who was always there, of the great vintage 1985 of Sassicaia, which kind of became a myth, won a lot of international awards, won international competitions, beating all the great Cabernets of the world, including the great Bordeaux. So let's say it was kind of the starting point of the international Sassicaia myth. Then there were other vintages, the 88 right after that, but basically, let's say Sassicaia 85 showed that Sassicaia could really compete with wines from all over the world. Actually, even the group of 72 individuals had achieved a remarkable feat in London, receiving an esteemed international award determined by a panel of renowned experts from across the globe. This achievement had astounded everyone, as the wine originated from a then unknown region and managed to surpass the reputations of famous wines, particularly those from Bordeaux. Such an outcome seemed totally unforeseen. However, in short, under Niccolò's guidance, the story of Sassicaia primarily represented the affirmation of this wine's success, proving that Bulgari had the ability to produce truly exceptional wines on the global stage. Since the year 2000, Sassicaia has been joined by a second wine. I did not tell you that the Bulgari estate of Sassicaia is called the San Guido estate, and it is the San Guido estate of Carducci's poetry, Carducci who lived in those parts for quite some time, so much so that Castagneto became Castagneto Carducci, and who was a great wine lover himself, so much so that his nickname was Enotrio, a sign that maybe sometimes he even exaggerated a little bit, but he was a little bit like that, quite sanguine. And the poem in front of San Guido is the one of the cypresses, of the Avenue of the Cypresses, clearly. It's really the one that somehow made that area known to the world, because then Carducci became a world-famous poet. I was telling you, in the year 2000, Sassicaia was joined by another wine, which is Guidalberto. The Guidalberto was born precisely in the year 2000. It is not only from Cabernet, Franc, and Sauvignon grapes, or rather Cabernet, Sauvignon, and Franc, because Sassicaia is about 80% Cabernet Sauvignon and 20% Cabernet Franc, a little bit like the great Pauillacs in Bordeaux. And the Guidalberto, on the other hand, is a blend, we could say, or rather a vinaggio, between Cabernet and Sauvignon for 60% and Merlot for 40%. Percentages play a crucial role in winemaking. Guidalberto, a wine created by the San Guido estate, ages for a slightly shorter period compared to Sassicaia. While Sassicaia spends around 18 months in barrique, Guidalberto matures for merely 15 months. This discrepancy is due to the fact that Merlot, a component of Guidalberto, possesses a softer structure than Cabernet. The intention behind Guidalberto is to offer a wine that is less extreme and imposing than Sassicaia. It aims to be more approachable and suitable for consumption at a younger age. On the contrary, Sassicaia beautifully ages over time. The Guidalberto wine pays homage to Guidalberto della Girardesca, Niccolò Incisa's great-great-grandfather, highlighting the historical ownership of the San Guido and Sassicaia estates by the Girardesca family. In the year 2002, a new addition was made to the San Guido estate called Le Diffès, making it the third wine in their collection. Le Diffès can be considered the younger sibling, the third son-in-law, and also the simplest wine in a way, like an everyday wine. However, it is important to note that even though it can be enjoyed on a daily basis, its price is a bit higher than what one would expect for an everyday wine, ranging between 22 and 24 euros per bottle, within certain limits. Now let's talk about the characteristics of Le Diffès. Made primarily with 70% Cabernet Sauvignon and 30% Sangiovese, it is quite distinct from other wines. This is because Sangiovese is known for its acidity and primary aromas. Due to these qualities, Le Diffès has gained popularity as a wine that can be consumed more easily. It goes well with a nice barbecue and does not require years and years of aging, unlike Sassicaia and partly Guidalberto. Moving on to the tasting, I would like to know which wines are currently being featured at San Guido Estate as well as at Sassicaia Estate. This year, the highlighted options are the 2019 selections of Le Diffès and Guidalberto alongside the 2018 Bolgheri Sassicaia. So the vintage of 2019 is quite a warm one, producing wines with a very good structure. On the other hand, the vintage of 2018 is known for its more elegant wines, especially in the entire Bolgheri area. Therefore, we can expect a Le Diffès and Guidalberto that are slightly more structured, as well as a very elegant Sassicaia, which is known to consistently exhibit these characteristics. In fact, Sassicaia is widely regarded as one of the most elegant wines, if not the most elegant, in the entire Bolgheri area. Personally, I can easily distinguish it in blind tastings. It stands apart not only due to my expertise, but also because it is simply different from the rest. This wine embodies harmony, elegance, and is easily enjoyable. It truly captures attention when tasted with a little bit of care. And we start with Le Diffès of 2019. Le Diffès del 2019 is this, and it's a bright ruby color, not too concentrated. And here you can tell there's Sangiovese in it, because Sangiovese has less color than Cabernet and Merlot, especially Cabernet. It has less anthocyaninic strength, we could say. It has less coloring strength. Let's try to smell the aromas. The aromas are fruity above all, and the reference fruit is probably between blueberry but also a little bit of cherry, precisely because Sangiovese has this characteristic. Then you can smell a little bit of wood. Le Diffès makes from 8 to 12 months in second and third passage barriques. So not new wood, however, a little bit of spice can be felt. Let's try tasting. Here the relationship between the tonicity that comes from the Cabernet especially, and instead the acidity of the Sangiovese is very funny because it makes for a good taste dialectic. You know that tannins inhibit salivation instead. Acidity re-stimulates it. So this relationship between taking away salivation and instead stimulating salivation is very enjoyable, precisely because it gives a gustatory complexity that is normally difficult to find. It has a good structure because it is a 2019, but within the defenses that it is the smaller wine than its younger brother, we could say Guidalberto, and especially Bolgheri Sassicaia. It is a Toscana IGT. Clearly, it does not have the Bolgheri appellation, and it is a wine of extraordinary and very pleasant drinkability, even though it is not a very complex wine. One thing that needs to be said about the San Guido estate and the Sassicaia estate and the San Guido and Sassicaia wines is that for the last few years, Priscilla Incisa della Rocchetta, who is the third generation of the Incisa della Rocchetta family who are involved in wine, obviously has joined the company and is really taking care of it in a very brilliant way. She is the first female, and this is a sign of the times In terms of opinion, let's proceed to the Guidalberto, a Toscana IGT wine from 2019. We previously mentioned that it contains 70% Cabernet Sauvignon and 30% Merlot. However, sometimes the percentages can vary, such as 60% Cabernet Sauvignon and 40% Merlot. This variation depends on the vintage, as there are no fixed recipes for these wines. The composition is influenced by the seasonal conditions. Similar to Bordeaux, cooler vintages tend to have a slightly higher proportion of Merlot, while warmer vintages favor a bit more Cabernet Sauvignon. The reason for this is that Merlot ripens earlier, making it thrive in cooler vintages. In contrast, Cabernet Sauvignon requires sufficient sunlight and warmth to achieve optimal ripeness. Let's try tasting the Guido Alberto 2019 so important vintage. The color is much more intense than the defenses, and it is, as it were, a proper Bordeaux color in the sense that it has this intense ruby with good concentration, not so dark, because there is not an excessive gloom and intensity. There is, however, some notes that are a little bit more purplish than the defenses. Let's try the aromas. There is a predominant presence of small fruits in this region alongside the unmistakable spicy notes. Additionally, there are hints of resin, which may remind one of the Bulgari area's distinct characteristics. We can liken this to a Mediterranean version of Bordeaux, with the inclusion of Mediterranean elements like maquis and pine resin. These characteristics undoubtedly define the flavor profile here. Perhaps it is because a small amount of resin from the trees is carried by the wind onto the grapes, which could explain it. In certain areas of Australia, the taste of pinon trees is reminiscent of eucalyptus, and when you visit the vineyards, you will notice the abundance of eucalyptus trees nearby. This correlation may also contribute to the flavor profile. It could be, it's not science, but it's common sense. Let's try to taste it. It is a very elegant wine. It is a great version of Guidalberto. The Guidalberto pays a little bit the price of having the Sassicaia in front of it, but very often it is a really interesting, elegant wine. Here, obviously, the note, tannic, we might say, is a little bit more evident than the acidity, but it's obvious. Cabernets are this, Cabernet Merlots, Bordelaise cuts are a little bit this. It may not possess the intense strength of a pure Cabernet, but it exudes a certain elegance that is truly remarkable in this particular vintage. We may wonder what dishes to pair it with and how best to serve it. While it could complement grilled meats and regional specialties such as lasagna, more sophisticated options could be considered. The Scotili, traditional dishes from the area, would be suitable, along with cured meats like wild boar and pasta dishes like pisci with meat sauce or pappardelle with hare sauce. These delightful gastronomic selections are an ideal match for a wine like Guidalberto del Sal. The approximate character count of this revised text is 766. We come to the birthday boy, which is the Bulgari Sassicaia 2018, which turns 50 with this vintage. The Bulgari Sassicaia 2018, I was saying, comes from a vintage that is a little bit cooler than others, much cooler than the 2017, a little bit similar to the 2010 probably in some ways, however, of great elegance. Cabernet Sauvignon, 80-85%, Cabernet Franc, 15-20%, depends a little bit on the vintages. There are never fixed blends. The wine blends are not recipes. Even though wine producers may not be physically present, they commonly cite the same percentage of grape varieties for simplicity's sake. This is particularly true when it comes to the American press, which seems to have an obsession with these details. Interestingly, they prioritize the grape variety over the wine's origin. However, in reality, it is never exactly as they claim. For example, the 2018 Sassicaia vintage falls within a certain range, but precise figures are never provided. Those involved in the cultivation of the vineyard are aware that various factors, like the maturation process and the selection of barrique cuts, greatly influence the taste and characteristics of the wine. Now, let's shift our attention to the 2018 Sassicaia vintage. It is a highly captivating vintage with a color that unmistakably represents Sassicaia, a ruby hue with subtle garnet undertones. The intensity is noteworthy without being overly concentrated. This lack of excessive concentration is one of the unique qualities that sets Sassicaia apart from other wines, as they at times exhibit a darker appearance due to the inclusion of Petit Verdot and slightly more colorful Brittany varieties to achieve these specific characteristics. Let's try the aromas. The aromas are of great elegance. It's almost exciting to feel Sassicaia because it's really a myth, an icon of Italian wine. Its birthday is not only important for Sassicaia, for Borgheri, for the Incisa della Rocchetta, but really for Italian wine because Sassicaia very much cleared Italian wine through customs, although it did not have as an ampelographic base of autotomic Vitigni. However, it was the one that made it clear that in Italy, at that time, when great wines were few, you could make wines with a different step. Well, and here the different step can be understood because the olfactory complexity of Sassicaia, even so young, already can be sensed. And it can be sensed because certainly there are the notes of small fruits, there are the notes of resins, there are the notes of Mediterranean scrub, and there is also a light note of blood orange, which is really extraordinary. If we decide to go and experience it ourselves, and I must say, I find this prospect incredibly exhilarating. As critics, it is not often that we have the opportunity to taste a renowned Sassicaia and witness the outcome firsthand. It's really quite young and developing rapidly. But it is not yet, it is not undrinkable because of youth. All great wines can be drunk young and then they age very long. That's sort of like one of the main aspects. Waiting doesn't have to be excessively long, it can be quite lengthy. So, today we can confidently enjoy a Sassicaia from 88, maybe even from 78 or 77, which are still in excellent condition. However, by 2018, we can begin to experience its true essence, at least to some extent. Of course, if we left it there for 2 or 3 years, it would be better, but out of curiosity, one can also begin to taste it. And you can begin to guess that this will be a wine that will last a very long time. Why? Because it has its own liveliness, because it has tannins that are not aggressive, not drying, because it has good acidity. Precisely due to its cool vintage and exceptional structure, Sassicaia possesses ideal qualities for long-term aging. Now, the question arises, how should we pair it? The answer lies in the fact that Sassicaia brilliantly complements a wide array of delectable meat dishes, without a doubt, with some particularly rich first courses, undoubtedly. So, I would say that Sassicaia is also an eclectic wine in its own sphere, and it is a wine that should never be drunk too hot, always below 18 degrees, because it expresses a grace of its own that probably so many other wines do not have. So, as it were, I end the tasting of Sassicaia 2018 a bit excited, undoubtedly, and above all, wishing a happy birthday to Borgheri Sassicaia for its first 50 years.